100%. It is intolerable, insufferable. It's enough concessions already that have been made. Has to stop now.
No. Because the Constitution does not say that a person can shout, yell wolf in a crowded theater. If you are endangering people, then you don't have a constitutional right to do that.
You're not supposed to yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, it's going to explain to you exactly where that came from. The true meaning of fire in a crowded theater.
Fire! 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 Now you've heard it. Not shouted in a crowded theatre, admittedly. As I realise, I seem now to have shouted it in the Hogwarts dining room. But the point is made. Everyone knows the fatuous verdict of the greatly overpraised Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who asked for an actual example of when it would be proper to limit speech or define it as an action, gave that of shouting fire in a crowded theatre. It's very often forgotten what he was doing in that case was sending to prison a group of Yiddish-speaking socialists whose literature was printed in a language most Americans couldn't read, opposing President Wilson's participation in the First World War and the dragging of the United States into this sanguinary conflict, which the Yiddish-speaking socialists had fled from Russia to escape. In fact, it could be just as plausibly argued that the Yiddish-speaking socialists, who were jailed by the excellent and overpraised Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes, were the real firefighters, were the ones who were shouting fire when there really was fire in a very crowded theatre indeed. And who is to decide? Well, keep that question, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I may say comrades and friends.
It's interesting that Yiddish-speaking socialists, now, the Bolshevik Revolution happened and threw over the Tsar, because the Tsar was considered a god. The Jews were not treated well then. And of course, when the Tsar was thrown over, the Jews weren't treated well either. And socialism really became communism. Little did they know that they wouldn't be allowed under that type of system to practice their own religion. As we see that in schools, you can't really even have Santa Claus, can't have prayers, because we allowed freedom of religion in this country. We allowed it. And it was free in Canada and England.
No Muslim had demanded this. No Muslim imam had yet felt strong enough to dare demand that there be Sharia law in Britain. But the Archbishop of Canterbury says, well, let's make nice. Let's give it to them before they ask for it. Let's cry before we're hurt. Let's concede before it's even been demanded. This is a civilizational question to me. And it must be resisted.
Notion that there was a serious motion before the United Nations that saying anything critical of Islam would be criminalized. And that's the end of free speech, and it's very dangerous.
The United Nations so far non-binding resolution, which has carried now for 3 years, and was carried again this week, sponsored by Pakistan, a country for which we pay, but isn't really even a country, barely even a state. It's a construct of Muslim partitionism carved out of the body of India. It wants to tell us what we can say and what we can think in our own country. And it says that we mustn't ever use the word Islam in any sentence that includes the words violation of human rights, for example. Now, this is in the week when the government of Pakistan has handed over to the Taliban its most fertile valley, this valley of Swat, and said, you can run this valley, militarily and legally. You can have Sharia law, and you are the police and the enforcers of it. And you can close all the girls' schools. But we can't say that your religion is anything to do with the violation of human rights. It's preposterous.
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
There are madrasas within 50 miles of where I live in Washington, in Virginia. There are Saudi paid-for schools that preach violent anti-Semitism, a hatred of the Shia Muslims. Remember, don't ever forget, they hate other Muslims too. Of Hindus, of Christians and Crusaders, and of course of atheists. So they've got me, 3 times, I suppose, in this field of fire. And don't worry. It's coming to a place near you. The Qurans that are given out in our prison system to Muslim prisoners by Muslim chaplains, paid for by Saudi Arabia, are Qurans written to the Wahhabi tune. They're not just your everyday Quran. They're the Qurans that the Wahhabis want you to read, containing direct incitement. They're being given out with taxpayers' money in the prison system. Militias are forming. Next, you'll have militias of this kind with their own chaplains within the United States Armed Forces. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to have Wahhabi preachers in the US Armed Forces? You better get ready for it, unless you're going to take the James Madison view that there shouldn't be any chaplains in the US Armed Forces to begin with, or in the prison system. People want to pray, you can't stop them. But we cannot have state-subsidized prayer. We cannot have state-subsidized preachers or chaplains. Give it up, or give it to your deadliest enemy and pay for the rope that will choke you. This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen. I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can. And if you wonder what will happen if you don't, look and see how a cricket team in Middlesex in England had to change its name by force last week, because it was called, and had been for years, the Middlesex Crusaders. Look and see how stories about little pigs can't be taught to children in English schools anymore, lest offense be taken by the religion of peace. Resist it while you can.
And Christopher Hitchens said once, if you allow one in, you allow them all in. Then you allow them in, the ones in that don't tolerate the others. And now you don't have the others, but you do have prayer rooms and for Muslims, because they have to pray 5 times a day. And sects of Islam don't tolerate other sects of Islam, like I had mentioned before, Sufism. If you're a Sufi Muslim, you're a heretic. It's like recently in Egypt, that 385 were killed in a mosque. The mystical form of Islam. The man who started that wasn't Rumi, Idris Shah. He was a descendant of Muhammad, so he was protected. But Sufism and the followers of Sufism aren't. But you see, Christopher Hitchens warned us. If you let one in, you let them all in, right? And you may let the kind in that doesn't allow the others in, even others that call themselves Muslim as well. You know, shouldn't there be freedom for all of the Muslims? Different sects. See, that's the problem with it. Schools should be schools where children go to learn, not to be taught politics, essentially, unless it's a class about politics. It's enough to be a child. It's enough to go through puberty and the emotions of the growing pains. Learning is difficult. Children getting along, not getting along with each other, bullying each other.
Before your minds, I exempt myself from the Speaker's kind offer of protection that was so generously proffered at the opening of this evening. Anyone who wants to say anything abusive about or to me is quite free to do so, and welcome, in fact, at their own risk. And but before they do that, they must have taken, as I'm sure we all should, a short refresher course in the classic texts on this matter, which are John Milton's Areopagitica being the great hill of Athens for discussion and free expression, Thomas Paine's Introduction to the Age of Reason, and I would say John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty, in which it is variously said, I'll be very daring and summarize all three of these great gentlemen of the great tradition of especially English liberty in one go. What they say is, it's not just the right of the person who speaks to be heard. It is the right of everyone in the audience to listen and to hear. And every time you silence somebody, you make yourself a prisoner of your own action because you deny yourself the right to hear something. In other words, your own right to hear and be exposed is as much involved in all these cases as is the right of the other to voice his or her view. Indeed, as John Stuart Mill said, if all in society were agreed on the truth and beauty and value of one proposition, all except one person, it would be most important, in fact, it would become even more important, that that one heretic be heard, because we would still benefit from his perhaps outrageous or appalling view. In more modern times, this has been put, I think, best by a personal heroine of mine, Rosa Luxemburg, who said that the freedom of speech is meaningless unless it means the freedom of the person who thinks differently.
How important was that the hill in Athens? Freedom of expression. In America, freedom of expression and freedom of thought, freedom of speech. And that, it's not only a person's right, but you give someone a certain respect, don't you? When you let them be heard, as long as they're not being abusive about it, they're freely expressing ideas. You don't want to incite, you don't want it to go out of control, or it becomes argumentative. To listen to each other. And not only does someone feels heard, even if what they're saying is wrong, like an abused child might say something like, and this is far from what we're discussing today, might say something like, to rationalize why they're being abused. I get beaten up and I deserved it. I did something and I deserved it. And helps them feel stronger and helps them rationalize, helps them live with their parents, rationalize why their parents did such an atrocity to them. How important, it's a completely wrong statement, isn't it? But it is so important to hear that person, because they could also be saying something that could enlighten us all. As that child needs to be heard, and we also need to speak to them and not yell at them. And that way we can help bring them to an understanding, rather than sometimes they'll argue back with you because they're trying to survive. They're in mental anguish and cognitive dissonance. It causes them anguish for you to start giving them this information that completely contradicts their knowledge of the world, how they understand the world, how the world works and fits into place. And if saying that your parents are wrong or evil, who's doing this to you is bad, causes a lot of anguish. So there has to be a way to speak to them carefully. And we must be able to communicate constructively. So ideas can be fed. Say that person is a country. There's two countries. One country actually lives by freedom. It's a safe place for everyone to live, all ethnicities, all races, I'm going to stop saying races because we're all the human race. Everybody lives safely, and then there's this country that everybody's getting abused. It's chaos. They're being stifled. They cannot speak. They're in fear. How does one this country communicate with this country without creating war. So Europe's having a problem because you've got Western civilization, and then somebody's idea was to bring in a civilization that is actually living in Arabia during the Middle Ages. They cut off your hand if you steal something, or you stoned to death if you commit adultery, or if you're homosexual, you get pushed off the top of a building, or all these different laws, different ways of living. People could live in a completely different world, and then you put them together, and then you would think anybody who's rational, reasonable, would say, wait a second, you can't exactly put these two cultures together. Let's not judge this one, the one that's living in medieval Arabia. We're not going to judge that as right or wrong. We're not going to judge either one as right or wrong. But the material fact is, putting them together is going to cause a lot of hardship, war. A lot of people are not going to get along. People aren't going to understand each other. It's not just we speak different languages. There's culture. There's 1,400 years between the two cultures. One is living 1,400 years ago, and one is living in the year 2018. And you bring them together. And they speak different languages, different religion, different everything. Understand their laws, right? We understand our laws. Western civilization. You're going to make a big war. And also you're taking these people who want to live in 14th century Arabia and want to live in people who go to Renaissance festivals. They kind of want to live in the Renaissance. You're taking them away from their homelands. Their homelands are being destroyed, and you're taking them away, and you're putting them in a cold, horrible climate. Actually, it's a cold climate. That alone is abusive. And you've taken them away from their homelands into this other world, and that big clash. Somehow you want to bring people together, but it's going to have to be a little slower. But if this group wants to stay in 14th century Arabia and live by certain laws that they say are ordained by God, it doesn't look like a secular laws where no religion is the ruling religion. Everybody has the freedom of religion to practice it on their own. And the laws are for the good of everyone. These two are not going to come together. And whoever had that idea, it's kind of obvious it's not going to work. It's not going to work. There might be other lands that they might be better in, to move better in, where they can live as they want to, freely as they want to, in other lands. But this is not going to work. People from 1,400 years ago who live in the present day and here, they both need their freedom of speech. They both need to be heard. These people will say, this is what we want. We want to live by Sharia. And these people say, we want to live by the Magna Carta or the Constitution or something else, or socialism. We want to live by these things. Okay. And it doesn't work. So how do you there's the abused child who lives in the same civilization, same way, Western civilization, might be reached. All different types of therapies, not just sit there and I sit here and you talk and whatever, and I'll give you some drugs and then come back next week. We're talking about ways, effective communication to get through to that abused child. That way, that isn't right. And it's okay to say your parents beating you is bad. And it doesn't destroy your whole world. There might be somebody who stands up and says something that no one in the room has ever considered. That's a very good idea. But somebody might stand up speaking and having an idea that nobody thought of. Everybody in the room is hitting their wives. And one person has a better idea, like when Jesus said, "He amongst you without sin, cast the first stone." And they all realized that, see, according to the Old Testament, even lying was punishable by death. Everybody had sinned. So that stone should have been turned on them, and they realized, this stone is really for me. It took someone to break this, child sacrifice. That was the norm. People sacrificing human beings. That was the norm all over the world. All over the world, people sacrificed people. All colors, all religions sacrificed people. Christianity was just one with God, and that ended it. So one person stands up, and if you listen to them, everybody drops the stone, and the woman who committed adultery, which is not a good thing to do because the guy's married. Actually, the guy's more at fault, and he's the one who should have been there more than her because he was the one that was married. Where is he? No, they're ready to kill the woman. That's the way things were in those days. We've come a long way. But everything changed. That was it. He made sense without destroying the Old Testament. A prophet said, are you going to go against the prophets, the Torah, say that it's no, we'll stone you to death? He just said, amongst you without sin, cast the first stone. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. And they let him speak. And it ended. Well, at least in the Judeo-Christian world. Actually, there was no Christianity quite yet. In the Judeo world, it ended. So see how important freedom of speech is, and somebody with a new idea, even if it's an insane person on the street. Sometimes I've heard the most profound things from people screaming on the streets. Most of the time, they have no idea how to live, how to eat, how to dress, how to bathe. And then all of a sudden they'll stop me and they'll say, "Bah, you're wise." And you know God is speaking through them. So if you listen, you may benefit greatly by hearing something that you thought was heretical. Yet it changed everything, didn't it? Nothing has changed better in this world. Look at the things that we've accepted through science and health, cures. We were benefited by listening to them and said, there's a possibility that that's true. And we've had cures to diseases because we've opened ourselves up to that. But if we say, no, diseases are demons, we have to cast them out. Or something like that.
If everybody in North America is forced to attend at school training in sensitivity on Holocaust awareness and is taught to study the final solution, about which nothing was actually done by this country or North America or the United Kingdom while it was going on, but let's say as if in compensation for that, everyone's made to swallow an official and unalterable story of it now, and it's taught as the great moral exemplar, the moral equivalent of the morally lacking elements of the Second World War, the way of stilling our uneasy conscience about that combat. If that's the case with everybody, as it more or less is, and one person gets up and says, you know what, this Holocaust, I'm not sure it even happened. In fact, I'm pretty certain it didn't. Indeed, I begin to wonder if the only thing is that the Jews brought a little bit of violence on themselves. That person doesn't just have a right to speak. That person's right to speak must be given extra protection, because what he has to say must have taken him some effort to come up with, might contain a grain of historical truth, might in any case give people to think about why do they know what they already think they know. How do I know that I know this, except that I've always been taught this and never heard anything else? It's always worth establishing first principles. It's always worth saying, what would you do if you met a Flat Earth Society member? Come to think of it, how can I prove the Earth is round? Am I sure about the theory of evolution? I know it's supposed to be true. Here's someone who says there's no such thing, it's all intelligent design. How sure am I of my own views? Don't take refuge in the false security of consensus and the feeling that whatever you think, you're bound to be okay because you're in the safely moral majority.
The Earth is on the back of a turtle. You know, the sky is actually just a dome of some kind. We are benefited by listening to a view that might seem heretical or crazy even. We've done ourselves harm by not hearing it. Because as Hitchens said, we know that the Holocaust happened. We certainly do. And we will not admit that the world sat out while that happened. And we pat ourselves on the backs. Of course, I wasn't alive then. We pat ourselves on the backs that we freed them and we stopped the concentration camps, but we didn't stand up like that famous saying, you know, they came for the gypsies and I was not a gypsy, so I said nothing. I think it was a preacher that said that. And then it ends, you know, and they came for the Jews and I was not a Jew, so I did not say anything. And then they came for me and then there was no one left to speak. We have to speak up right away when there's an injustice, when there's something wrong. Because, remember, in the end, it will benefit all of us. And if they're not quite right, you know, you might not be quite right. Just because you're saying, oh, that person is completely wrong. I can even listen to the rantings of my ex-crazy socialist boyfriend, and I could see the values in a lot of the things he was saying. But he wouldn't listen at all to anything I said, or that this has never worked and it's only ended in death and revolution. But I could see some of those ideas there. I can see your side, but he could never see anybody else's side but his own. And that's what socialism does. It shuts you off. And nobody learns, you know, because sometimes you can get one person has part of the truth, the other one has part of the truth. And then if you have a coming together, if you learn to listen, then I think we got it now. Now I get you what you're saying. This makes sense now.
One of the proudest moments of my life, that's to say, in the recent past, has been defending the British historian David Irving, who is now in prison in Austria for nothing more than the potential of uttering an unwelcome thought on Austrian soil. He didn't actually say anything in Austria. He wasn't even accused of saying anything. He was accused of perhaps planning to say something that violated an Austrian law that says only one version of the history of the Second World War may be taught in our brave little Tyrolean republic. The republic that gave us Kurt Waldheim as Secretary General of the United Nations, a man wanted in several countries for war crimes. You know, the country that has Jörg Haider, the leader of its own fascist party, in the cabinet that sent David Irving to jail.
You see, as I said before with communism, one version. See, our history is being rewritten. It's being forgotten. It's why there's atrocities all over the world. We have women with vagina hats in the streets and being spearheaded by women who listen to anti-Semitic preachers and women who belong to a sect that believes in female genital mutilation. So, which means vagina hat on their head should be just, do you ever see those swimming caps? All rubber, just pink rubber on their heads. You know, because it's not just cut off, it's sewn up. So that's what they should be really wearing on their heads. But they're so ignorant because they believe in only one version that they've been told. Well, Louis Farrakhan, anti-Semite, if Obama appeared with him, he must be good. Anything Obama says or appears with is good. Because it's Obama, right? Even though he said some horrible anti-Semitic things. And he believes that way. And, but we will only believe the version of him that we're told. We're told a certain version. Well, he's not white. That's good. He belongs to a religion that the left considers not white, which is really interesting. That's why they kind of latched on to Islam. That's another reason that it's totalitarian and it kind of works well with communism, socialism. It's kind of like a dictatorship. So it works with that one-party rule that's coming along, because the Democrats are kind of, they're coming along. And I'll talk more about that. Well, anyway, so they only believe in the version that they've been told because they can trust that person, because either they're a good Democrat, like a good communist, a good Democrat, or the person who told them wasn't white, or the person who shook his hand was not white, you know. Obama shook his hand. Whatever version of the story you all believe. Or the woman who heads, one of the heads of the Women's March, who belongs to a religion that cuts off everything, the entire genitalia, and sews you up, and then on the wedding night, the husband breaks his way in. She's the head of that march. So these women who's got the vagina hats, they might as well have those swim, you know, those rubber swimming caps on, covering their ears. Because they're not hearing, they're only hearing one version. They're not hearing the version of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who is Somalian. She's black, she's dark-skinned black from Africa. And they call her a racist because she's warning people about how in Africa, they do that when the little girl was born. And it happened to her. But these women who are for, some guy did some kind of sexual misconduct, and there's all varying degrees. Some guy made a pass at them, and that's sexual misconduct. I mean, there is sexual assault, definitely clear-cut line. Yet somehow these other things are okay, and they call everyone racist. And that same movement is now teaching the white women who were claiming that they were in the Me Too movement, who they were sexually assaulted. Now they're teaching them, they've been oppressing women of color. They too are in the same, basically they're putting the white women in the same boat as they put all the men who may have done a sexual indiscretion or something. They're in that same boat now, even though they're Democrats. They're teaching them, they're putting them through classes, they're putting them in their place, they're brainwashing them. You thought you were a victim, but guess what? You've made a victim out of, even though you never thought you did it, and you probably, most of them never, ever, ever did it. But they're telling them that they did something that they didn't do. See how one version of a story isn't good. one version of history isn't good, and erasing history isn't good. Not listening to all sides isn't good, because the truth might be out there, but you're only hearing one thing, and you are being silenced and being beaten into submission like a communist totalitarian regime. That's coming soon when we have one-party rule. One little kiss from Felina. Goodbye.
Only one version of the history of the Second World War may be taught in our brave little Tyrolean republic. You know the two things that have made Austria famous, given it its reputation, by any chance? Just what I've got you. I hope there are some Austrians here to be upset by it. Well, a pity if not, but the two great achievements of Austria are to have convinced the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Viennese. Now to this proud record they can add, they have the courage finally to face their past and lock up a British historian who's committed no crime except that of thought and writing. And that's a scandal. And I can't find a seconder usually when I propose this, but I don't care. I don't need a seconder. My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.